Today I'm going to show you how I make homemade bread. It's super simple to make and doesn't take a long time to throw the ingredients together. When it comes out of the oven with my 3 kids, it's usually gone by the end of the night. I hope you enjoy. So here's a list of the ingredients. I highly recommend bread flour instead of all-purpose. 1 tablespoon is really all you're going to need, is just that one. You don't need the rest of them. 1 packet of dry yeast and something to stir in your bowl. I do have a thermometer here. You want the temperature of the water to be about 100, 110 degrees. Any normal water heater will push out that appropriate temperature. You don't need to warm it up at all. And then everything else you see here. All right, so let's start making some bread. So we're going to start out with 1 cup of water. The recipe calls for 2 1/4, but I start out with 1 of that. And I put in here 1 packet of the yeast. What I'm also going to put in here is 1 tablespoon of sugar. The recipe calls for 4 tablespoons of sugar. So I'll put 1 of those in the water to help dissolve the yeast. And the other 3, you'll see me here momentarily put it in with the flour. So I just mix it, get it off with a spoon, and then I'm going to let that set for a second and start to foam up. And while that's foaming up, I'm going to go ahead and put all my dry ingredients in the bowl in preparation for mixing. So what I have here is just a 1 cup measuring, and I just loosely put it in there and shake it off flat. I'm going to put a total of 5 to begin with in the bowl. I think the recipe calls for about 5.5 to 6, 6.5, but I've never used more than 5.5, no matter what the ambient temperature is or relative humidity. It's not rocket science here. So that right there is my half of 5.5. I've put 5 in the bowl, and I'll leave that set there for when I start to knead it here in a few minutes. And here's where I talked about earlier about putting in 3 tablespoons of sugar. And the last ingredient, well, the dry ingredients, is 1 tablespoon of salt. If you put too much salt in, you're really going to taste it in the bread. I've made that mistake before, thinking more salt would be good, but it's really not. You want to avoid that as much as you can. All right, so I've got all the dry ingredients. You can see that it's started to foam up a little bit. We'll pour it in, and then we're ready to go to town. You know, I got this recipe from my grandma. I changed it ever slightly. She used to put milk and eggs in it, but I've found that this is a little easier to do than using that, and I substitute vegetable oil instead of the milk and eggs. So now what I've done is poured in the wet ingredients, and I'm over at the faucet, and I'm putting in the other 1 1/4 cups of water. The total amount of liquid for this recipe is 2 1/4. So I just had to rinse out the rest of that yeast in that measuring cup and put in 1 1/4 more water. And last but not least is your vegetable oil. 2 tablespoons, that's what it calls for. And that's it. Just about 5 minutes of mixing and kneading and we'll be ready to bake. I have made this bread one time in a KitchenAid, and I will say that it was easier, but to be honest, I missed out on the whole experience of making bread. To me, it's therapeutic. I love to mix it. I love to knead it. I just like being, as dumb as it sounds, one with the bread. And there's a consistency of what it will look like as we're mixing it. And I use my flat scraper. One of the reasons I use this kind of flat edge scraper instead of a wooden spoon is it helps me scrape off the side of the bowl as I mix it. And it will eventually start coming together. And you can see right now, it's not a soupy mess. There's enough flour in there to give it a consistency that it's not just going to stick everywhere. So I will use a little pinch on my fingers to scrape off the wooden spatula. And then I'll start putting a little on my fingers as I start kneading it by hand. And then what I'll show you is that it doesn't stick to my fingers. It's tacky, but it doesn't come off in clumps, and that's kind of what you want. If it's really soupy and starts being just a mess on your fingers, you need more flour. So I will say that the happy balance between too much flour in your recipe and not enough, you really have to find the knack of finding it a nice consistency. You want it tacky, but you don't want it sticky mess everywhere. So we'll just knead it here in the bowl until I get everything kind of melded together into one ball. And then we'll take it out and do it on the stovetop. And kind of use that ball to help clean up the side of the bowl as well to get all the residual that's left on there. And add a little flour as you need it. Because as you mix it together, it will get stickier because what's on the inside will work to the outside. Clean bowl. We'll use that here in a minute. So now we're just going to do the inevitable kneading. And as you can see, well, you kind of can't see, the consistency is what you're looking for. It's going to be about 5 minutes of kneading. And if you pull it apart, right now, I'm sorry my hand's in the way, but it's going to rip. It's not going to stretch. So the idea of kneading it is to work the dough so that it changes. The yeast in there is going to change as you knead it. It's going to get more pliable, and eventually after about 5 minutes you'll be able to pull the dough apart like Mickey Mouse ears, and it won't break. It'll just kind of stretch on you, and that's the consistency you're looking for. So we're just going to do this. And if you look at the clock, I started at about 8:39, 8:40, and we'll take it to about 8:45. And at that point, that's about, I'm a goofball. At that 5 minute mark, that's about all you want to do. Anything more than that, again, you're going to start getting too much air in it. All right, so I'm going to keep quiet here for a minute and just let you watch the action. Okay, I'm back with you. I purposely didn't fast forward this kneading time, and I did it on purpose to let you watch the changing of the dough. It really does change consistency after about 3 or 4 minutes of kneading it. And every now and then I'll pull it apart to see how stretchier it gets. I just think you'd lose something if I was to fast forward through the kneading process. After all, you're watching this because you want to learn. And I will preface this with, I am not a professional baker by any means. Anybody who is a professional baker is going to watch this and probably have serious critiques. But you know what? It's homemade bread. I got it from my grandmother, and I've been doing it for years, and I don't need a recipe, and it tastes awesome. So that's all I have to say about that. So now we're done. It's been 5 minutes. I like it. So I'll take the same bowl that I did before and spray it with some Pam. And then I'm just going to put the dough in. So we're going to do a total of 2 1-hour rises. The first one right here as a dough ball. At the end of this, we're going to go ahead and take it and separate it into 2 and then put those in pans and do a second 1-hour rise. Once that's done, it'll be a 25-minute bake. Okay, this is the end of the first rise. It's been in for about an hour. You don't have to put it in the oven to rise. You can set it on the counter, but I just choose to put it in the oven. So what I did there is just punch a hole in it to deflate it. You're trying to just get the air out of it. One thing I found when I first started making bread was after that first rise and before you start dividing it up into 2 to put it in pans, if you knead it too much, you're going to get way too many air bubbles in it. So all I did there was just take a spatula and cut it in 2. And I found that if I spend too much time kneading again, it'll get too airy, and there will be bubbles in your bread when you get it out. So just give it a few shape shifts and then put it in your pan. So all I did here was just spray some Pam, coat it around nice and good on all sides, and then kind of form it in a little ball. If you get a little couple of air pockets on the top, it's really not a big deal, but I just deflate them. But just try not to do it too much. And then reform it a little bit, kind of an oblong shape, and put it in your pan. You're good to go. You really can't screw this up. So once they're in place, I'm going to put them back in the oven to do the second 1-hour rise. Again, they don't need to go in the oven. I just put it in there to get it off the counter, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, we're back. It's been a little bit more than an hour. It's kind of cold in my apartment. It's in the middle of December. So they've probably been in an hour and a half. Really, just judge it how you like it. The longer you leave it in, the more it's going to fill the pan, the higher it's going to rise. If you leave it in way too long to rise before you start cooking it, it'll get too tall. But once it's risen and you're ready to bake it, just preheat the oven to 350 degrees. And how it looks right now is how it's going to look when it comes out of the oven. So what I mean is it's not going to continue to get bigger once you start to bake it. So if you're happy with how it looks at the end of the second rise, preheat the oven and then put them in. Okay, so what we have now is 2 loaves fully risen after the second rise. And I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees. Set them in nice and gently so not to deflate. And then we're going to set the timer to 25 minutes. We'll bake for 25 minutes, and then we'll take them out. And they should be slightly hollowed to the touch when they're done. All right, well, it's been 25 minutes exactly since I set the timer, and the bread's done. I don't even check it really. It looks golden brown. So I pulled them out. And honestly, if they're done, they're just going to fall out of the pan. I've got a little bread cutting board that I usually use. Get my pot holders, and I'm just going to tip them over. I don't need to use a knife to cut them out or anything. If they're not done and they're not fully cooked, they'll stick to the side of the pan. But when they're done, they just fall right out. They look great. About the same size they were when they're done doing their rise. And no major air pockets. So now all I'm going to do is set them on a cutting board. And that's what I was referring to earlier. They should sound hollow when you tap on them when they're done. But now, trick of the trade, something I picked up in Koh Samui, is just get a little Crisco. And all I'm going to do is take some and spread it on the top. It really doesn't do anything to the taste of the bread. All it does is dress it up a little bit and make it look shiny. Make it look like it's professionally done. And if you don't have Crisco, stick butter works too. Just take it and rub it over the top of it. This is really what sets the bread apart from just being all dull and gray looking. But it doesn't need to be done, but it's a nice added feature. So yeah, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. It's as easy as it gets. You really can't screw this up. Making bread, I've had friends of mine try it for the first time, and it turns out great for them, and it always tastes unbelievably good. All right, happy baking. I hope you all enjoy.